This is episode 36 of the Relentless Man podcast. Professor Francis Su. Hi, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. We're your host, Christian Mojaiso, and our goal is to help men die empty, to make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that you have trapped within you, so that when you're on your deathbed, you have no regrets, because you gave life your all. In this episode, we're going to have a conversation with Prof Su. And Professor Francis Su is a professor of mathematics at Harvey Mudd College. Harvey Mudd College is a college in Claremont, California. It's in the United States. It's a top school, one of the best engineering schools in the country, arguably in the world. And really good at math too. And Professor Francis Su is a professor of mathematics at Harvey Mudd, and he's really good at many things. One of the things he's really good at is, well, obviously he's good at math, right? He's a good researcher. One of his greatest strengths is also his ability to teach. Now, if you've ever been in the education system, especially the college level, you realize it's very rare to find a professor who can really teach. And he's one of those people that has a very deep passion for teaching. And what makes him really interesting is the fact that Prof Su is really interested in his students. So one gets the sense that he's not just interested in one's capacity or the student's capacity to get good grades or his capacity to do math. He's interested in the student's capacity the student's humanity. He wants to check on you and make sure that you're doing well emotionally, that you're doing well psychologically, that you're thriving as a human being. And that's really rare, because typically what professors are trying to do is they're trying to see if you can do the math, can you do the computer science, can you do the subject. And usually one gets the impression with professors and teachers that really they value you for how good you are at the subject. But Prof Su is a little different, and he's always emphasized, and one can see that he truly believes it, that really your value as a human being does not depend on whether you get good grades or not. So if you get an A in his class, doesn't make you more valuable than if you got a B or a C or a D, or if you failed or if you dropped out of the class. And that's a rare kind of thing to find. And Professor Francis Su really believes that and tries to emphasize it in every class that he teaches. So Christian has had the privilege of being in his classes for quite some time, and it's been a very transformational and moving experience. And this particular episode is really exciting because we're going to have a chat with Prof Su, and in this episode we go into the deep questions of life itself, questions of meaning, questions about purpose. We ask Prof Su about what's his purpose in life. We talk about death, about legacy. We talk about this concept called significance. Now, significance is key. It turns out that most of the dysfunction that we have tends to be a result of us trying to feel significant. Usually when you find someone who's trying to be the life of the party, if you look carefully, you may realize, oh wow, the reason the guy is trying to be the life of the party is because he wants to be the center of attention. And why does he want to be the center of attention? Or why is it that sometimes when we have conversations with people, we tend to try to talk a lot about ourselves or bring up our problems? Why do we do that? Or when we're hanging out with people, we try to show them all the important people we know, or we're trying to show them all the knowledge that we have. Why do we feel this need to place ourselves at the center of attention, to show people how brilliant we are, how strong we are, how intelligent we are? This is a deep question. Why do we have this need for significance? And if we have this need for significance, well, how can we satisfy this need for significance, etc.? Right? These are all questions that are tackled in this particular episode with Prof Su. We delve really deep into these questions. Now, this intro has gone on already for too long. Hope you find it to be valuable and enjoyable to you. And in particular, hope it helps you on your own journey to begin the journey of discovering for yourself the answers to these deep questions of life. Because it appears that you realizing your true potential, you dying empty, seems to be very linked to you having answered these deep questions of life for yourself. So, we give you Prof Su.
Hi, Prof Su, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. We're really honored that you were able to spare some time to show up and talk to us and try to tackle some of the deep questions of life, and also to tell us a bit about how you view the world and what's most important to you and what you think is important for our listeners.
Great, thanks. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, what have you been up to these days? Last time I checked, maybe you were on sabbatical. Was that right?
That's correct. I am on sabbatical, which is basically a release from teaching responsibilities to pursue research. And so I'm doing research up at the Math Sciences Research Institute, which is in Berkeley, California.
All right. So what sort of research are you doing? It's probably too complicated, huh?
No, I can try to explain it. I am studying, so the research area is geometric and topological combinatorics, which is a mouthful. You can think of combinatorics as the study of clever ways of counting things. And in geometric combinatorics, we're interested in counting things that are associated with geometric objects. One example might be something like a polyhedron, or a polyhedron is like think of a diamond with lots of facets. You might be interested in studying some of the properties of these diamonds in high dimension. So that's sort of one area. That's going on. One strand of research that's going on at the Institute this semester. Topological combinatorics is bringing methods from topology to study problems in combinatorics, and vice versa. And so there's a group of scholars here, about 40 people here, studying various questions in geometric and topological combinatorics. And so in my area is, for the kinds of questions I'm interested in, are what are called combinatorial fixed point theorems. And so these are results that are sort of analogs of ideas from another area of math, analysis, which these are combinatorial versions of what are called fixed point theorems. So in analysis, you learn about fixed point theorems as theorems that say under some function, a point remains fixed, and I'm interested in studying combinatorial versions of these things. And so some of these things have applications in economics and other fields, and of course I'm interested in the mathematical aspects of these questions.
Okay, so the types of questions you're tackling. So you're talking about, so there's this branch of mathematics called analysis and another one called combinatorics. And we're saying combinatorics is concerned with counting. And so are you saying that the problems we're tackling are problems that are basically at the intersection of these two areas?
I would say the problems I'm tackling are more trying to make a connection between the two areas rather than at the intersection.
All right. Okay. Trying to make a connection between them. Mm-hmm. So are you working on problems that are unsolved, or are many people working on these problems?
Yeah, I guess every research project it's a research project because you're trying to do something that's not been done before. So I'm working on some questions that are outgrowths of other problems that have been solved. So, often you solve one problem and it raises more questions than you could answer. And so I've sort of moved on to some questions that were generated by prior research projects.
So, how long have these, let's say one of the problems you're working on now, how long have they been unsolved for?
Well, it varies. I mean, some of the problems are, if they come out of a research project that I did before, then basically that other research problem generated this question. For instance, it just recently solved a problem that I had been thinking about for maybe 10 years in some version.
Whoa. That's when you say 10 years, does that mean you're like thinking about the problem, every day for 10 years?
No.
Okay.
Because you think about a problem for a while really hard, and then you put it down, and maybe later on you pick it up again and you put it down, or you see something or read something that makes you think, oh, hey, there's a connection between this and this other problem I'm thinking about. And so it's sort of off and on thinking about for 10 years, not consistently.
Wow. Well, so I mean, most people, when they have a problem and maybe haven't solved it in 20 minutes, are thinking of just giving up and moving on to something else. So why didn't you move on? Why did you stick with the problem and just kept thinking about it and trying approaches for such an extended period of time?
Well, I guess one of the things that being an academic cultivates in you is a quest for knowledge and learning. And so in some ways, when you're doing research, you're always in a state of being stuck, because once you solve the problem, you move on to another problem that's not solved. So it is a sort of normal to be stuck on a problem. That's sort of what we do as researchers, is we like being stuck, and we relish trying to solve problems we haven't been able to solve yet.
Right. Are we saying that we enjoy more? We enjoy
the struggle.
The struggle. Is the struggle more enjoyable than a correct solution?
Well, I would say the struggle actually makes finding the answer much more joyful.
Oh, okay.
So, I think, of course, you could struggle for, all your life on a problem and not answer it. And you could still find some satisfaction in that, because you understand, the more you think about a problem, the more you understand it deeply. You understand why it's a hard problem. But of course, it is thrilling to answer the question finally, if you can. But I wouldn't say everything is locked up in the answer. I think a lot of the joy comes from wrestling with the problem.
So you're saying that if you struggled with a problem, say for 20 years, and did not find a correct solution, you would not consider that a failure, or that wouldn't disturb you emotionally in any way?
No, it might be a little unsatisfying, but I wouldn't consider that a failure. Part of what happens, it's kind of like, you have a puzzle you're trying to solve, and it's fun to think about the problem, fun to think about the puzzle. And that makes you, if someone else solves a problem, it makes you very interested in seeing how they solve the problem. But I wouldn't say I wouldn't chalk that up as a failure.
Well, that's unusual, because the typical definition of success is getting it right. So were you always this way? Did you always just relish the struggle irrespective of what the outcome was, whether or not you solved the problem or got it right?
Yeah, I think that really depends on what kind of problem. If it's a mathematical problem, I guess I find it very interesting to think about certain questions. If it were, you have to care about the problem if you're going to enjoy struggling with it. I don't know. It's a good question. It's definitely. I guess I'd have to think a little bit more about why I relish the struggle in some situations and not others.
Okay, so that's one issue that we were raising here. Is it seems that your interest for all problems is not the same. In some problems you're interested, and you can enjoy the struggle, and in others, not so much? That's one question.
Mm-hmm.
Another one to think about is, well, what about in those fields that you relish the struggle? For example, in the mathematical problems that you do work on,
Mm-hmm.
when you hit these points of frustration, uh, what do you do to just to keep going? Is there some mental self-talk that's going on, or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes it's a matter of, if I'm stuck, it's a matter of saying, okay, I wonder if there's another way to think about it. And so you try a different approach, right? And this is kind of like almost any problem solving. You sort of say, okay, this one way didn't work. Let me try something else. And you have sort of a library of tools and techniques that you've learned over. I mean, of course, I'm a professional mathematician now, and so what that means is I had a lot of experience with problem solving in various contexts, and so that gives me sort of a toolbox to say, okay, if this didn't work, let me try that. So that's one way to try to get unstuck. Another way to get unstuck for me is to just stop thinking about the problem. So I'll give you an example. This recent problem I was working on, I stayed up really late one night thinking about this. Felt like I was really close, but I just couldn't see how to finish the problem. But then I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up and an idea just popped into my head, and I tried it and it worked. So that's another way to get unstuck. Is, I guess, it's also in the category of trying something different. And in this case, something different means stopping thinking about it consciously and letting maybe your subconscious mind do some work.
Well, yeah, that is fascinating. So, do you think you like? Are we saying that your mind was probably working on the problem as you slept?
Maybe, I don't know. I'd like to think so.
Right. And so the insight that you ended up coming up with, was it radically different from the approaches you were using to solve the problem before you decided to abandon it temporarily?
In this case, no, it wasn't that different. It was just a missing puzzle piece that I didn't see the night before. That when I woke up, I saw. But yeah, it wasn't a completely different approach.
Okay. So it was all right. It was one of the things you were toying with before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see. I see. Wow, interesting. So,
But this problem that I was working on, for 10 years, the reason that I was making progress, even the night before, and the reason I was excited about it was that approach I was trying over the course of several days was a totally new approach in the 10 years I've been thinking about the problem. So it was like somebody said something the other week, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I think that will actually solve this problem, in a completely different way than I'd been thinking about the problem before." And so that's why I was excited. I could see that there was some sort of promise for this strategy. And so, problem solving is often a multi-step process. You sort of see an overall strategy, but you're not sure if necessarily all the pieces are going to fit together until you try them.
okay, so what happens? So before you mentioned that when you have a problem, sometimes you've been working on it, and then you're kind of stuck. And one way is to come up with a new strategy, or to abandon working on the problem for a while and maybe resume working on it later. Right. So those seem to be what you described.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering about is, well, what happens if you try, you reach a point where you literally cannot think up a new strategy, and you sleep on it, and you abandon it for a month and come back, and or even a couple of years, and there's still no fresh ideas. What do you do then?
I might put it down and not think about it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're maybe you're trying to draw some big life lessons from this, right?
Well, just whatever you think. So
Yeah.
I really
Okay.
don't know. I'm completely in the dark here. So
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm putting it. If I pick it up and I don't have any new ideas and I play with it for a little while, I'll just put it down again and think about something else. But with problems in life that aren't necessarily math problems, sometimes you don't have the luxury of putting a problem down, right? So that's kind of the difference between an academic problem and a life problem, right? Like, if life problem is, oh no, my dad has cancer, you don't have the luxury of putting that problem down. So it falls in a slightly different category. But maybe, on the other hand, you can't fatigue yourself in trying to address that life problem. You have to also sometimes say, okay, even though I'm going through a really hard time with this one particular issue, I need a break from it.
So, right. So you've just mentioned a category. We've just looked at sort of the categories of problems. Some of them are academic mathematical problems, and some of them are real life problems. For example, a parent facing, let's say, cancer, or many other problems we face in life outside of academics. So I guess one question is mathematical, we've mentioned one case in which it's different, but is mathematical problem solving really that different from problem solving in with real life problems? Let's call them like that.
Mm-hmm.
Six spouses or problems in relationships, for instance.
Uh-huh. Well, I would say that mathematical problem solving can equip you to solve problems in life and contribute something to helping you think through all the possibilities. Because in math problem solving, one of the things you're trying to do is classify, right? Like what kind of problem is this? What kind of tools might I use to bring to bear on the problem? You're often looking for structure that helps you solve the problem. You often try systematic approaches, and all those things that I just mentioned are actually features of how you go about problem solving in life, right? You encounter a problem and you say, oh, is this like a problem that I've seen before? That's classification. And you assemble a set of tools, that you say, okay, now once you figure out what kind of problem it is, you think you're often forced to think systematically about how you're going to address the problem. What are all the pieces that are going to go into that? So I would say that math problem solving is not exactly like life problem solving, but it can contribute to life problem solving.
Right. I see. So could you think of a time when you applied your mathematical problem solving skills to a problem that wasn't really a math problem, was more of perhaps a social problem? Or
yes, I can. I'll give you an example. So
great.
One particularly vivid example came when this was many years ago. I was on a trip to China, and my mother had died, so we were bringing her ashes back. And this was a remote village that we were traveling to, and it was really hard to get there. We had to take some roads that were very bumpy and not paved at all. And we had hired a car to take us from the airport to this village 3 hours away by car on bumpy roads. And, so imagine, this is like 6 of us packed in this car with luggage and all that stuff. And so we were traveling over this bumpy road, and there was a place on the road where there was a huge bump, like a big speed bump.
Right.
And our car was kind of weighed down, and we were like, when our car, the front tires had rolled over the bump, the bump actually was so high that it had wedged against the bottom of the cab of the car. So
does that mean like the tires were lifted? One tire at least was lifted off the ground, or?
Yeah, or it was sort of lifted off the ground. So when you tried to press the accelerator, it was the wheels were spinning in the soft dirt. And so we were sitting there in the car and we were thinking, oh my gosh, it's gonna be nightfall real soon. We're gonna be stuck on this road all night, and there's nobody around because it's a remote road and nobody's traveling on this road. And so we're all there like thinking, okay, how do we get unstuck? And of course, the first thing you think is, oh well, you try to wedge something underneath the tire so you have some traction, and that was a standard approach. It didn't work. And then I was like, okay, well, what else could you do? So I basically thought somehow this problem felt very much like a problem that I'd seen, in a puzzle book. It was like a math problem solving book. Except it was slightly different. So the math problem solving book was about a truck driving under a bridge, an overpass. And the truck was basically driving under this overpass, and it got stuck. It got wedged against, at the top of the cab of the truck was wedged against the bridge. Okay.
Okay.
And
so that means that the car was stuck and couldn't move. The truck was unable to move.
The truck was stuck. It couldn't move. And it couldn't back up because there's traffic behind it.
Okay? Right.
And so the question was, this was in the puzzle solving book, the question was, what should you do? And I'm going to ask you, do you have any ideas? What should you do? If you're in the truck stuck under an overpass, you can't back up, and you're just a few inches too tall to get under the bridge.
Right. Well, okay, so this is unfair because I've seen the problem before.
Okay.
So we're going to deflate the tires, right?
Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay. So, this is a very, very common puzzle, right? But somehow my mathematical training had suggested to me that this problem about the car stuck over a bump was very similar to the truck stuck under an overpass.
Also, how are they similar?
Well, like my mind was saying, there's similar features, right? It's like you have an object, and you're trying to push it along a road, and you have some obstacle that's sort of holding the cab of the car.
Mm-hmm.
You're holding the cab of the car, right? And so I thought, okay, well that's great. So actually, in one case, one is dual to the other, right? In mathematics, we like to say this is dual to that, right? Because it feels the same, but it's slightly reversed, right? The reversal is car stuck over a bump versus truck stuck under an overpass.
Okay? Right.
The other thing is mathematical training sort of helps you strip away things that are not really essential to the problem, right? You begin to see what the structure is, right? You could see right away here, for instance, that...
So what were the non-essentials in this case?
It didn't matter if it's a truck or a car, right? It's just an object that has wheels, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's sort of the idealization here is you have an object, a moving object with wheels, and you have, some kind of structure that it's stuck against. Okay, so then knowing that puzzle and knowing how to solve that puzzle, you let air out of the tires. What do you think I did next?
Well, okay, so, in this case, we can't deflate the tires. That doesn't help. Can we inflate the tires?
Yes. Okay, that's what I thought too. Which is basically putting this problem solving experience, the classification, to work, right?
Yeah.
Now the only problem with that approach, which would have worked if we had a pump, is that we didn't have a pump.
Oh no! Who travels without a pump?
Yes.
Makes problem solving harder, huh?
Yeah. It threw another wrench into the problem, right?
All right. More interesting. Right?
Yes. And okay. And so that's the other thing. So here, the mathematical experience had sort of cultivated in me this virtue of having perseverance, right? First time you try it, you try to solve a problem, it doesn't work. Well, then I was very comfortable with like repeatedly attacking the problem with different things, right? I didn't get discouraged. I just said, okay, look, there must be some other way to try to solve this problem. So that's when the other light bulb hit me, which was in math you often try to look at again what are the essentials here, like what's actually the issue, like what is at the heart of what makes this problem hard, right?
In this case, what's at the heart of the issue?
Yeah, but I mean in general when you do it, before I answer that, when you solve a math problem, you're often like trying lots of examples. You're doing lots of little thought experiments, so to speak, and until you realize, oh, this problem is really a problem about prime numbers or whatever, right? Like you realize, okay, and that's when you make some progress. So in this case, what I realized was, I was spending so much time thinking about the relationship between the wheels and the ground. But what I wasn't thinking about was the relationship between the wheels and the car and the cab of the car. Because the issue was because the reason we were stuck is because, we're stuck over this bump because the bump was too high, was kept focusing on the tires to try to solve the problem. And I thought, okay, one thing I haven't tried here is focusing on the cab of the car, right? Okay, so that's when it hit me, because I realized, wait a minute, there's 6 of us in this car, and we have, like 300 pounds of luggage in the trunk.
Right.
And I said, if I could change the relationship between the wheels and the car, not the wheels and the ground, then maybe I can make progress in a different way. And so that's when it dawned on me. We were all sitting in this car weighing the cab of the car down. And so what I said to everybody was, hey, let's all get out of this car and let's get all the luggage out of the car as well. And so, not surprisingly then, the cab of the car lifted and was no longer stuck on the bump.
Wow.
We just drove over. Isn't that awesome?
No, absolutely. That's that's like really critical disciplined thinking.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would say mathematical training helps. I mean, of course, you don't, people solve problems without necessarily having lots of formal mathematical training, but what they're really doing is mathematical thinking, and they don't realize it. And of course, if you learn some math formally, you begin to see, there's a lot of structure in the way you can approach problems.
Right. So
isn't that cool? Isn't that awesome?
Oh no! It absolutely is.
I was so proud of myself for that.
Yeah, and I guess one of the most exciting things about it is the principle that underlies what you did there. Because now we have the idea of if you have a problem, you're trying to classify it. Have I seen this problem before? And so it turns out that we can extract lessons from what you did with the car and maybe apply them to different problems, potentially even social problems. Right.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Oh, no. What I mean is, so, for instance, okay, so you are driving over this bump and the car gets stuck. And first of all, well, we're not sure how we're going to get the car to move. So we realize that, okay, it turns out that this problem of this car not being able to move is kind of similar. It's in the same class of problems as the story I had read in this book, this math puzzle book.
Right.
So by now thinking about it in terms of related problems, we begin to get some ideas. So in this case, you started with, let's look at the wheel and the ground.
Yes.
And although that didn't work, it refined your thinking and helped you to move towards a better solution.
That's right. And not give up when the first thing didn't work. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's completely different from how we are taught to think about math, because typically we're taught that math is just a bunch of uh,
Facts.
formulas you need to memorize. Yeah.
Yes, or plug in, numbers to get some other number, and you're not thinking at all. That's part of the problem. Misperception people have about mathematics is that it's just about a bunch of memorization and plug and check.
Mm.
And
So
I like to say that anything a computer can do it's not really mathematics, right? Like if math isn't
how so?
about
How so? Yeah.
math isn't about computing things fast or getting an answer. Math is about understanding why the answer makes sense.
Oh, so you're saying math is about meaning, right? More, it's
Yeah, math's about meaning. It's not about the actual, answer. Like when I ask, have you calculate 3 times 5 and you get
Mhm.
15, that's not doing math.
Okay. Well, that's really different. Well, I mean, everybody would say you're doing math. You just multiplied correctly.
Yeah, but a calculator can do that. I didn't need, I didn't necessarily, I didn't necessarily need you to solve that problem. But I think where math comes in is realizing that if I want to calculate 3 times 5, it's actually the same as 5 times 3. And maybe that's, two different ways of solving the same problem is beneficial because, you're actually doing some critical thinking. You're saying, which way is going to be easier for me?
Hmm.
That's math, right? That's math is being able to say, why is 3 times 5 equal to 5 times 3? Well, that's the commutative property. But why is that true? Well, that's true because 3 rows of 5 things looks like 5 columns of 3 things, right? So
Right. Right.
like you have this picture in your mind and you see, oh, it's the same picture looked at in 2 different ways, therefore they must be the same. That's the thinking that goes on behind a mathematical idea.
Hmm.
And so, what this means then is, if I want to be creative, do some creative problem solving, I can exploit some of these properties to do that, right? So, like for instance, if I ask you to do, some, fast, some calculation in your head, like I'm gonna have to come up with an example here. How about this? Like 3 times. Here, let me do an example. Yeah, suppose I ask you to do a calculation like this. I like you to do 8 times 7 times 5 in your head. Well,
Okay.
you realize, hey, maybe I could do that as 8 times 5 times 7, right?
Right. 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 Because it's easier to multiply 8 by 5 first, and then multiply by 7.
Right.
Right. Right. And that you'd say that when we do that, we're now doing math.
We're doing math because we actually had the idea that I know this property is true, and it means I can creatively choose which method I'm going to try.
Hmm.
Now, think about how hard that would be. I mean, it's not of course, you could program a calculator to try to do that, but that's part of what you're doing when you're writing that program
Hmm.
is telling the calculator, hey, check this. Maybe this is easier, right? But that's really where the math comes in, right? This is why I say, anything a calculator can do isn't math, And one of the things you have to think about here is pretty soon, maybe real soon, humans are in danger of being replaced, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So last, what was it? On Friday, I had a conversation with Prof Dubs, and this was the precise thing we're worried about.
Mm-hmm.
That machines may replace us.
Yeah, and I think the last place or the last way in which they're going to replace us is it involves the using the mind and actually thinking, right? I mean,
Mm.
I'm not going to say that artificial intelligence will never get there, but if you want to, just speaking to your audience here, if you want to live, to have a career where you don't have to fear getting replaced, well, then you're going to have uh, to get involved in a profession where you're actually learning to think about what you're learning rather than just doing plug and chug.
Right.
Plug and chug. I mean, there are things we don't teach our students to do anymore that we used to teach because, well, why do they need to learn it, right? I mean, we don't teach kids how to take square roots by hand, although that used to be something that people learned.
Right.
There's no need for it. I mean, it's interesting. It could make a nice side project to learn a method to take square roots by hand, but it's not critical. On the other hand, it is critical to be able to understand and interpret the results that you get from a calculation. Right? Does this answer make sense? Is a question that a computer is not going to be able to answer, at least not yet.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so we're placing a huge emphasis on meaning. A while back, I'd taken a look at, so there's these guys in the US called memory champions. And I don't know if you've heard of them. Memory champions, what they do is they memorize really huge chunks of data. So some guy, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think his name was Ben Pridmore, was able to memorize maybe 1,000 binary digits in 5 minutes, something weird like this. And the way he was able to do it was by getting, I think, every binary digit and associating it with an image, making it meaningful. And by being able to do this, he was able to remember so many binary, so many. It's called the memory palace technique of like associating things with images and therefore attaching meaning to them.
Right. I don't know if this is the same thing, but I had heard about this idea of, you want to memorize something, a long string of numbers or letters or words or something. You might imagine putting down those physical numbers in a house and walking through the house to remember those digits.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the same technique. The thing is called Cicero memory palace technique.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right. Yeah. So let's switch gears a bit. What got you interested in mathematics?
I guess I liked patterns in math when I was a kid. I mean, at the time, of course, you only learn about arithmetic or things, but one of the first aha moments I had with mathematics was when one of my parents' friends came over and he said, I might have been 3 or 4 years old or something. I don't remember. And I guess he thought, let's see if this guy's a genius or not, and let's give him a problem that he knew Gauss was able to solve, right? So there's this apocryphal story of Gauss adding the numbers from 1 to 100 very quickly by just associating the one. Like if I want to add the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way up to 100, so there's a story that Gauss was able to do it very quickly, and he just he knew the answer was 5,050, right?
Yeah.
And the way he did it was he associated 1 with 100, 2 with 99, 3 with 98. So if you work from the front and the back, pairing up those numbers, each of those pairs adds to 101.
Right.
And then you have 50 pairs. So 50 times 101 is easy. That's 50, 5,050.
Right.
So anyways,
you were given this problem to solve as well?
I was given this problem to solve, and of course I couldn't solve it. I mean, I'm not as brilliant as Gauss, I'm sure, at age 3 or 4. But when he told me this, how Gauss did it, I remember thinking to myself, wow, that was really neat. Right? So I had the aha moment, the experience.
Wait, how old were you at this time?
I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. I don't remember.
Okay.
But it was an early moment. It was a moment where I realized math is really beautiful. It's really interesting, right? Like being able to, and it's powerful, right? Like being able to answer do a calculation like that really quickly with having a little bit of insight was an amazing experience, right? And again, that's something a calculator doesn't do. A calculator doesn't sit there and say, oh, hey, guess what? I can pair up these things, right? Calculator brute forces it. Yeah.
Did you decide then that you want to be a mathematician? Like in the movies, the kid sees a baseball and he knows, I'm going to be a baseball player. Was that moment enough to like basically clarify things in your mind that you're just going to become a mathematician?
Well, I'm sure at the time I didn't even know what a mathematician was, but
okay.
I think what I would probably be fair to say is it definitely made me think I like math, and if there's a job involving math, I probably would be happy with it. I mean, I probably didn't even know what a job was at the time, but I certainly knew I liked it. And my parents would, give me books, point me towards books on math and things like that.
Right. And okay, and so you were. It's from what I gather, you were a very good. You're a very good student through elementary school and high school and college. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, I was
one of the very best in the class, sort of thing.
I was a pretty good student. Yeah, that's probably fair.
Right. And then I think I've heard you mention once that when you go to graduate school, it became things changed a bit. You aren't necessarily at the top of the classes.
Yeah, and let me just say right off the bat, especially for your listeners, that there is no one way to a math career. I know many examples of people who weren't great students who are now very very good mathematicians, and so the path to getting to being a mathematician isn't always like my experience in middle school or grade school or whatever, right?
Right. You don't have to be
You don't have to be
a whiz kid.
You don't have to be whatever. However you define whiz kid. You don't have to be that to realize. Some people realize very late. Some people realize in college or even after college that math is really something that they find beautiful. And part of the reason is the math that they're exposed to up until that point is not really math, and then they're bored by it, and they just don't see what math really is. That math is about thinking and understanding patterns and using your ingenuity to try to solve problems. So anyways, I just want to preface with that. So grad school was probably the place where I realized that I am not going to be the best at what I thought I was best at.
What do you mean?
I mean, up until that point, I was pretty much however you measure best, I guess. My view of math has changed a lot since then, but at the time I thought it was about getting good grades in math classes. I was near the top of the class, and I realized in grad school, oh my gosh, there are all these people who are way more, have way more talented than I. Part of that, of course, is you're psyching yourself out a little bit. Part of it is, no, they really actually are. I could tell they actually have more insight, more experience.
Right. So you in grad school and you interacted with students who, I mean, just partly subjectively and also objectively, they were better than you at the math at the time, at least.
Yeah.
Or at least you perceived them to be. Mm-hmm. So how did that make you feel?
Well, it definitely made me feel like, do I really belong in this profession? And do I have what I need to thrive in this profession? Yeah, so I mean that's actually, in some ways it was a very hard experience, but in some ways actually a very good experience, because we're all going to hit that wall at some point. Whatever we decide to do, there's always going to be somebody in the world who's better than you at whatever you think you're talented at. And so I think one of the things it did for me is it helped me ask the question, why am I doing mathematics to begin with? Am I doing math because I need to be seen as the best? that I need to be seen as successful? Or should I do it for a different reason? And so, when I had that crisis in grad school and thought about quitting, I realized ultimately if I quit, I would miss doing math. And it was because I loved thinking about math that I would miss it. I had to really, at that point, separate my interest in this vocation from any accolades or acclaim that I was hoping to get from it.
So before we came to this realization that we need to separate our love for the subject from the accolades that we get, was it, did you, before that, were you mostly concerned about just uh, having good grades and achieving a lot?
I was mostly concerned with that. I mean, in grad school, you don't really have often, they stop giving you grades because you're starting to do research and things like that. Grades aren't as important.
Right. So what was your primary motivation then?
Well, I mean, the problem is that there's a culture shift from undergrad to grad school where I was so used to working for a grade that when I got to grad school and I wasn't getting grades, it felt a little weird. It kind of felt like, oh, well, am I making any progress at all? Because I'm not really getting grades.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, there was a culture shock there. I probably did. I mean, again, this is related to where we think what we think success is. I mean, is success really about getting good grades? I don't think so. I don't think that's what it takes to to live a fulfilled life. Because ultimately, chasing grades is really about chasing something very ephemeral, right? I mean, grades, 10 years from now, people don't care what grades you made. So why am I placing such a big emphasis on this? 10 years from now, people aren't going to care what was on my resume. Now,
Right.
of course, some people are going to push back. Some people are going to say, well, actually, it is going to affect what kind of job, your next job or whatever it is.
Yes. How do you answer to that?
Well, I say, well, why do you think your next, like, what do you think? Why is that next job so important? Like, do you think that's what's going to make you happy? I mean, everybody's chasing after something. And I think what you don't realize, at least when you're young, is that the things you chase after often themselves aren't able to make you happy.
Okay.
I'm not, of course, talking about basic human needs, right? Like if you are impoverished and you're hungry, yes, I think, and we need to do a better job at helping people who are not able to have their basic human needs met. But what I'm addressing here is the difference between having a high paying job or a job you really love, or chasing after whatever it is you're chasing after, right? Like some people chase after beauty, but beauty is fleeting. It's not going to always stay with you, especially as you get older. So then where are you going to place your hope? Some people chase after money, but when you have a lot of money, you realize that isn't necessarily going to make you happy either.
Why do you think, are we saying that the reason we chase after things like money, success, achievement, good grades, recommendations, the applause of others, are we saying that the reason we chase after these things is we think they're going to make us happy?
I would say it's a strong motivator. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so if these things are not going to make us happy, what will? Or are we just doomed?
Yes, good question. Well, of course, you're now venturing into the spiritual territory, perhaps.
Hey, this is perfectly fine. Whatever helps us to solve the problem. It's the fundamental problem of life.
Yes, the fundamental problem of life. Okay, well, I mean, I don't think any material thing or any of those things that we talked about, money, beauty, success, whatever that means, I don't think any things are ultimately going to make us happy. And normally that would be a very depressing thing, potentially. Certainly was, could be for me.
No, it is depressing. Yeah,
it's depressing to think about. I think what that ultimately does is it helps you ask yourself, what actually is meaningful? And sometimes we approach that problem by saying, okay, well, I kind of feel like the things that are meaningful, the things that at the end of my life I will look back on and say that was important, right? And, on your deathbed, are you going to say a particular grade was important? No, I don't think so. But you might say, for instance, a particular relationship was important. And so, so that's that's sort of, I would say from my own perspective that's actually a pointer to something that's important, which is a relationship, that is rooted somewhere. And relationships, themselves, of course, they can fade away too, right? Like if the person that you love passes away,
right,
that can bring a crisis of meaning, right? So, for me, and I'll just mention to your listeners, and you certainly know this as well, that, it's hard to separate a lot of the things that we think are meaningful in life from asking deep spiritual questions, right? Like, and for me, I'm coming from a Christian perspective.
Right.
I would say ultimately, there isn't, ultimately what's meaningful is having a relationship with God. Of course, you have to define what we mean by God, but I would say that's ultimately meaningful. And every other thing that's good in this life is a reflection or a shadow of that one true relationship.
How does your relationship with God make you happy, if that's what we're all pursuing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it puts me so first of all, I have not always been a Christian. I was not a Christian until college, and I faced sort of the crisis that we're talking about in realizing, like, I don't think any of this is meaningful, right? Like grades or whatever. My mother was dying. My dad also had cancer. And so part of me was like, well, what's the whole point of this? Why am I working so hard for something? And ultimately all that happens is we die.
Mm-hmm.
And I know different people answer that question differently. Some people have sort of decided that they're just going to try to make meaning somehow. But I guess the reason that a relationship with God is meaningful for me and why that's important to me is I believe that it's rooted in the historical person, and that that person was Jesus. And so I have a certain hope that there is more to this life because I am trusting in a person who lived an extraordinary life. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
more questions. Let's
sure.
see. Right. So, how does because the person we're talking about here is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does trusting in Jesus bring us happiness and take us out of this trap of hoping that achievements and physical material things are going to fulfill us?
Yeah. Well, I guess the hope that I have is that Jesus was in fact who he said he was, and that he demonstrated that by. Okay, I feel like this is becoming too spiritual for your audience, but
no, that over here there's no, in the Relentless Man podcast there's no line.
Okay.
Between spiritual, not spiritual. No.
Okay.
That's the whole point of it, to get to the deep questions, whatever the answers may be.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, if I really was created to be in relationship with the creator of the universe. And if I have some confidence, although of course that's mixed in with always there's doubts as well. But if I have some confidence that narrative is true because of a historical person named Jesus, then that should give me great hope that, death is not the end of my existence. That we are spiritual beings that have eternal, will have an eternal presence, and that I was created for something more. That's, I guess, I think that's a hope that I have. And a lot of people think about like, oh, what is this Christian stuff about life after death? Like, I don't want to live forever, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's actually the focus, right? Like the focus of the Christian life isn't so I can live on forever, right? The focus is, how do I actually live a redeemed life in the here and now?
Okay, so we're saying that living a Christian life is not about going to heaven. It's the focus is about living well now, and going to heaven is of course part of it. But are we saying that living well now should be the principal focus of, or is the principal focus of a Christian faith?
Yeah, so I have to define what it means to live well, right? Because some people would say living well is having a big house and a good job.
And a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when you realize that none of those other things are going to give you the things that you want, you begin to realize that God is the only one who can fulfill the need, right? Like if why am I so attracted to success? Well, it's really because I have a need for significance.
Uh-huh.
But if I realize that God is giving me a significance that will never be achieved through material success, then I won't feel as attracted to having material success.
Let's dig into the significance part. So we're saying that, so what we're talking about here is that part of the reason we're attracted to achieving things and having a big house is because we feel it will make us significant. And what we're saying is that those things will not make us significant, because immediately we have some, we always need more. Would that be how you'd say it? Or
yeah, that is one of the dangers of anything we chase after. You might call them idols, right? Like you idolize success, you idolize beauty, or you idolize money. And one of the dangers of any idol is that you never get enough of it. Anytime you get something, you never feel that it's enough.
Right.
Okay. People who chase after beauty feel that they're always feel inferior to other people who are more beautiful, and that's actually a big trap, right? That's kind of a living hell, right? Like where you're sort of saying you're never able to be happy because guess what? You're comparing yourself to the next person.
Okay. And so ultimately that can't give us significance.
It can't give us significance. It can't give us what we want, but it's a pointer to some need that we have, right?
Right. So, so material things are not going to give us significance. Couldn't we just solve the significance problem by not needing to be significant, or is that not possible?
Well, that's a good question. What do you think about that? Do you think you're able to just say, I don't need to be significant?
So, so I'll give you my perspective, and then please give us your perspective, though. So that way we can contrast. So from my own perspective, I realized as well that, there's nothing like, in my case, it was also the need to be significant was prominent. It explained all of my flaws. Every time I behaved in ways that I regretted later, when I went to think about it, it was because I was chasing significance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when I was really angry and disappointed because I thought maybe someone was smarter than me. When I got into a room and started making jokes and joking on and on, I thought about later, like, why did I do that? And the reason was, well, if I make jokes and people are laughing, they're all focused on me, then I'm significant.
Yes.
And so, right. And so that was a pathology. I realized that was like the core sickness I had.
Yes.
And, right. And so I figured out that then I thought maybe I can get rid of it. But it felt like a very fundamental need, like the need for food, the need to be significant. So I had to try to look elsewhere for significance.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I was still curious whether, I know, why can't we just outgrow this need to be significant and just live without looking for significance anywhere? I was wondering if it's even possible.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. Certainly not easy, and part of that is because I also am. I also have the conviction that I am a sinful human being, and what that means is I'm always going to have this temptation to put myself first and think about my needs more than the needs of my neighbor.
Right.
And that's that's a nature that I'm going to always have to wrestle with.
Okay, and there is no way of just getting rid of this desire to be significant.
Well, I guess that what I'm saying is the desire is misplaced, right? Like, or maybe the means that you want to achieve significance is misplaced, right? If we're created to be in relationship with God, who makes us significant, then I begin to realize I don't need to seek approval as much as I seek approval from other people, right? I don't need to be the life of the party if I in order to make myself feel good. Now, there is a role in telling jokes to make other people happy. You can certainly have a good motive for telling jokes.
Yeah. I guess, how do you know when the motive is pure? But I guess one can sense when the joke is made to genuinely make people happy and it's not about being the center of attention.
Right. I will say that I don't have a lot of areas of my life where I feel like I've grown, where I feel like I'm not still struggling with trying to be significant in ways that are not good for me. But I will say, because of my experience in grad school, having to nearly give up my dream of getting a PhD and then coming back to it for better reasons.
Yeah.
I will say that does make it a lot easier for me to say, okay, coming back to grad school, I had to say, I'm going to get this PhD, but I'm not going to do it because I need to be successful. That has given me a lot of freedom in my professional life to take risks, right? I'm not afraid of taking a risk in my professional life because I know I nearly gave this up. So it doesn't have the control over me that I think that it might otherwise have.
So, right. Are you saying that, are we saying here that changing your reasons for doing mathematics liberated you and enabled you to do mathematics better?
Yes.
How is that?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely examples where I took risks and it ultimately was beneficial. And if I'd never taken those risks, I would not have had some of those opportunities. But that's a byproduct of living in a certain kind of freedom. When I understand that my significance is in God and that I don't need other people's approval, that's liberating, right? I mean, because I spent most of high school comparing myself to other people, right?
Right.
It's kind of a childish thing to do, but we all still walk in childish ways, and if you want to grow up, you begin to realize you need to be other focused. And the best way to become able to be focused on others is to realize my needs don't need to be met through this other person, if they're met through God. If God gives me significance, if I understand how much God loves me, then I can actually be a more selfless person with other people, because I'm living out of that grace that I've been given.
All right. So the way you decided to tackle the problem of significance was to shift your significance to a more sustainable source. I mean, a sustainable source, which was your belief in God.
Yeah.
So, how does a belief in God give us or fulfill our need to be significant?
Yeah, good question. I guess the way I would think about it is that God is the one who assures me that I am I have meaning to Him, because He, I'm a child of God. That's a metaphor that basically, it's sort of, why, when does a kid, I mean, you can see this if you have kids, I suppose, but when you have kids, if a kid is secure in their love from their parent, then they don't act out as much. They don't need to get attention as much.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. That's maybe not. I'm trying to think of a good example here, but maybe that's the best example I can think of right now. Right, like, kids who have a lot of problems at home act out at school. Well, why do they do that? Because they're not secure in their love or the attachment that they have at home, where they have a primary relationship with somebody, but it's not well.
Right. Okay. So in the example of kids, the idea we're saying is, okay, if the parents give attention to the kid and they love the kid no longer needs to seek attention.
As much, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right, as much, right. And so does this mean that the way that God gives us significance is because He loves us, and just in the metaphor, just like children, if we have a God that loves us, an all-powerful being that loves us, then we don't really need to, or at least the need to seek significance elsewhere diminishes.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's really the love that God's love that gives us significance.
Yes. Yes.
That's that's very, 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 very interesting. Yeah, because it's one of those questions that just, yeah, it works on us whether the problem of significance works on us whether we are conscious of it working on us or not.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and unfortunately, yeah, it seems like just life can be really disastrous if we don't tackle it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, these are definitely deep questions.
Now that you have a stable source of significance, how does that affect your relationships with others?
Well, I hope it makes me more loving and less selfish. I mean, uh, I I certainly, day by day, of course, I have to quench my selfishness and selfish desires. But it helps when I pray through things or pray through some action. I often feel that I become less me-minded and more other-minded. I don't know. Are you thinking about something specific, or I'm not sure if I answered your question. But
Yeah, no, it's just like a shift like this. We're just thinking about, okay, so one thing you're saying is that once you no longer need to prove yourself to others,
mm-hmm.
you're saying that we become more, we become less selfish and more loving. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I think there's other things that go into being loving, but it certainly helps.
Okay.
It certainly contributes. Like you're able to stop focusing on yourself, then you're naturally going to have more resources to focus on other people.
Oh.
So in that way, yeah, you could be more loving. I guess another way you become more loving is you begin to realize that, you know, if we're all sharing the same struggle, maybe you have some more empathy than to help people with their own struggles.
Because you went through the struggles yourself?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, more empathy and more resources or bandwidth to think about others, because you're not just thinking about yourself.
Right. So let's see. So one of your the core pillars of your life is your faith in God. And then I think you'd mentioned before that relationships are also really important to you. Why are relationships so important to you?
Whoa, that's a deep question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I get on a roll and I can't stop.
No, I think relationships reflect something that I mean, I think every good thing in this life, in this world, is somehow a reflection of something divine.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, a relationship with another human being is the closest thing you can get to understanding what it means to have a relationship with God. And so, yeah, I think those things are very, very important.
So we're saying that if we have a relationship with another human being, it's the closest thing to having a divine relationship. So is a relationship with another human being, do we view it as a sort of divine interaction as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to explain this, but I mean,
yeah, please do.
I think we're all wired for or born with a desire to have relationship.
Uh-huh.
And I would see that as a reflection of the fact that we, you know, we have a desire for an ultimate relationship that is going to be meaningful and someone who can give us significance in a way that a mere another person can't. We all are born with a desire for, you know, for significance, and again, I see that as met in a person who's ultimately significant, the creator of the universe. We're all born with a desire for sex, and that is a reflection of the fact that what we're really trying to find in sex is intimacy. And the one being or person that we can have intimacy with, real true intimacy, is God. I mean, no other person is ever going to have the potential to know your innermost thoughts and wishes and desires and frailties than God.
Okay.
And so I guess I sort of see that maybe this is something C.S. Lewis said, is that, you know, if you have some kind of hunger, whatever it is, there's something in this world that fulfills it.
Okay.
Maybe not perfectly, but you know, ultimately these are all divine reflections of something divine.
Oh, I see. So we're saying that if we look at our deepest desires,
Mm-hmm.
our deepest desires reflect the divine.
That's right.
Okay. Because nothing else can fulfill them. Is that? I don't know.
Can't can truly fulfill them. Obviously, you might have temporary fulfillment.
Right. But truly, right? When we talk about fulfillment, we mean like a sustainable sort of meeting of the need. Okay. All right. So, and since sex is, for example, you mentioned sex. Sex is one of these deep desires that we all have, these deep needs that we all have, and it also reflects our deep need for relationships.
That's true too. Yes, deep need for intimacy. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
For being known or knowing another person. We're covering everything on this podcast, Christian. Sex, money, success, power.
Wait, let's look at
God.
God, of course. yeah. Well, I mean, eating is a deep desire. The desire, like, for food. Does that have like a? I don't know. I'm wondering if we have like a. I guess. I mean, I wouldn't expect a divine solution to eating. Desire to eat, like just once you jack into it, you really don't need to eat anymore.
But it is only temporary.
Oh yeah, that's right. All right, the hunger is. Right. Hunger is temporary. That's right. I'm hungry, then I eat, and I'm not hungry anymore. Okay. But things like need to connect, right, need to be significant, those are not temporary. We always have them.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them divine. Is that it?
Yeah, you're asking good questions I haven't necessarily thought about. I don't know that I know that I can necessarily all think about everything, in life in this framework. This is part of it's a heuristic that sort of helps me think through, like, okay, why am I behaving this way? It's kind of the reflection you've done, right? Why am I behaving this way? And then you realize, it's because I want people to look at me, right?
Right.
It kind of comes from a deep need for significance. Well, then why do you have a deep need for significance? Well, if ultimately it's not being met by telling jokes, because people get tired of your jokes eventually.
Yeah, we don't want to think about that. Okay?
Then where is it ultimately going to be met?
Right.
If it's not ultimately going to be met, that would be depressing.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's sort of ultimately where I was in college, and in coming to faith was feeling like the world kind of looked depressing any other way.
Right. Okay, let's ask. I think we're almost running out of time, so let's just ask a few final questions. So, do you ever think of your life in terms of a purpose? Have you ever thought about maybe the purpose for your life? As Professor Su,
Yeah, that's a good question. I of course I think that has changed over time, potentially. I mean, certainly, now I don't know if you're just thinking about vocation or if you're talking about something even broader than that. But
no, not vocation. Vocation is just your job. Talking about purpose, mission for one's life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that vocation is bigger than your job.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea of a vocation is something you feel called to. In fact, it's where the word comes from, VOC, vocal.
Right.
Something you feel called to in a special way. So it is kind of like a mission. It doesn't have to be just your job, but often people think about vocation as applying to your job because that's where you spend a lot of your energies. Yeah, I mean, I guess vocationally, I feel right now, like my calling is to mathematics. I guess recently I've been thrust into some roles where I have to be a spokesperson for mathematics, and that's something that I'm learning to do. and I feel like I have been called to do. Not only something I was looking to do, but when you have certain opportunities and that present themselves, you ask yourself, well, maybe this is something I should try to take and run with and try to do the most amount of good that I can do with it. So yeah, I mean, I guess I do see myself as somebody whose mission, part of my mission, is to help people think clearly about mathematics, but I also like uh, helping people think about the larger things in their life as well, which is why I'm enjoying this conversation. But I enjoy having deep conversations like this. It's the kind of thing that, I don't have the luxury of doing quite as much now, but I certainly did a lot of them when I was in college, when I was your age.
Oh yeah, because you had a lot of time on your hands.
A lot more time than I have now, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, do you ever think of your life in terms of a legacy? You wanna, let's say, do you ever think about, a legacy, leaving a legacy?
Yeah, I guess if I, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question you asked, because the idea of leaving a legacy is also connected to the idea of being significant in some way.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I want everybody to remember my name.
Yeah, and I would say that it doesn't have to be connected to the idea of significance, although it often is, right? Like, my legacy could be helping people in some way where they didn't even know who it was that helped them, right?
Okay.
That certainly could be a legacy.
You want to help them without them knowing that you helped them.
I'm not saying that's my legacy. I'm just saying that's an
Okay.
example of how you could still talk about a legacy that where you weren't getting praised for it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I hope I've been able to do is help people think about the human side of mathematics through some of my speeches, and I would think of that as something that's a legacy. If I were to die today, I guess I would say, gosh, you know, I, as you know, I gave this talk about what it looks like to show grace in teaching, and I think a lot of people were moved by that, and it helped them think a little more clearly about what they're doing in their teaching. That teaching students that their dignity doesn't come from their accomplishments is one of the biggest things that we can do as teachers. I would call that a legacy. Yeah. I like helping people think about the deeper issues in life and how what they're doing actually is related to some of these deep, big questions. I guess I think about that as a legacy.
Right. Okay.
Some of the mathematical work I've done, I've certainly enjoyed, and I'll certainly leave behind. So I don't know. That's probably part of a legacy, but I don't place my trust in any of these things. Like, I don't need them to justify me, I guess is
right.
Part of my own Christian hope is that the only person who I ought to be looking to for an audience is God, right? And so at the end of my life, I hope he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Wow. I don't know. That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your answer was even better. So, okay. So, okay. I guess this is like if you just give a quick answer to this. It actually is a sort of question that demands a quick answer. Well, let's see. So, I mean, you're a teacher of mathematics. If you could only teach your students one thing, this is sort of a thought experiment, if you like. If you could only teach your students one thing that and such that if you taught it to them, they came out having mastered it. What one thing would you teach them?
You mean a mathematical thing?
No, just anything that you think would be the most important that you can teach them.
Anything that I can
Anything at all. Mathematics, life, anything.
I think the one thing would be that your dignity doesn't come from your accomplishments.
Right.
That would probably be the one thing.
Yeah, you you taught me that. You're the first person who ever told me that statement when I was taking your classes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope I finally got it.
Yeah, well, you're certainly doing some heavy reflection here, and I think you are getting it.
Okay, well we're basically done. So I guess is one thing is our listeners would probably want to they'll be very interested in learning about you. Where could they go to learn about Prof Su and what Prof Su is up to?
Well, I guess a good place to start is my webpage, since I have most of the things I'm doing posted on my webpage. I guess you can Google my name, Francis Su, at Harvey Mudd College, and you'll find my webpage, and it has some of the writings I've done and other things there.
Okay, is there any right? So basically, we could just go to your website and we'll learn about you and what you're up to there.
Yep, I'm on Twitter at Mathyawp, MATHYAWP.
All right. Well, I'll actually add more of this stuff I'll add your contacts I'll add your website and your Twitter. And do you have a Facebook account as well?
I do. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we'll add those to the episode description.
Yeah. I would say to your listeners, yeah. Anyway, sorry. I was just going to say.
No, what were you saying? Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, one of the things that often happens is people write me asking math questions, and so I would say, I enjoy hearing from people, but if you're going to ask me, your homework questions, it's probably better to ask your teacher, since I don't really have time to answer everybody's homework questions.
Do you even want to answer someone's homework question? They're supposed to struggle, right?
Yes, that's true. Exactly.
All right. Is there any maybe cause or particular project that you're involved in that you think our listeners ought to know about or get involved in?
I guess I've been spreading this message that math is something that everybody can do. And I think it would be great if our listeners sort of understood that message and spread it as well. I have a talk I recently gave called Mathematics for Human Flourishing, which you can find at my website. And I think your listeners might find that interesting if they've ever felt like they don't belong in math or that they're not a math person. I hope that will help them change the way they think about who they are.
Right, that's Mathematics for Human Flourishing. Yeah, Prof Su, thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, this was a lot of fun for me because I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners have also learned a lot. And it's just an honor talking to you, because the impact you've had on my life is tremendous. It's actually, I can't quantify it anymore. I learned from you a lot of ideas about how to teach math. You got me started on the deep questions of life. And in this particular conversation, the depth at which you've been able to go into these very deep, hard questions about significance and meaning, and where can we find meaning, and why do relationships matter. There's like only a very small subset of people that can really talk about these things, who have taken a lot of time to, work on these things. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. And at some point, some questions were hard, but for sticking with it and thinking up solutions sometimes on the spot. And that was the beauty of it.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's been great having you also in classes, and so I look forward to many more conversations.
All right, Prof. Well, have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for listening to this podcast episode. Hope it was of value to you. It was really, truly an inspiring conversation with Prof Su, tackling and delving into these very deep and fundamental questions of life. Questions of significance, questions of death, questions of living well, questions of happiness. And now the question is turned to you. What things will make you happy? How are you going to deal with your need for significance? What legacy will you leave on the world? How would you like to be remembered? What is the purpose of your life? Why were you born? What were you supposed to do on the planet? Are you doing what you were born to do? All these are questions that are brought up in this episode. And the question again has to be posed here is, if you don't answer these questions for yourself, if you don't figure out who you are, if you don't figure out what your drive, if you don't figure out your own solution to this problem of significance, if you keep doing things that are not making you happy, how could you possibly die empty? How could you possibly realize your true potential? How could you possibly push the human race forward if your mind is in a state of conflict? If you spend your time trying to be the center of attention, trying to be noticed, hoping that people will enhance you, that people's approval will make you better, that people's love will make you more significant. If you're that broken and fractured, how could you possibly die empty? How could you possibly realize your true potential? So these are some of the questions that are brought up again in this episode. Things that would be of great value to actually think about. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this podcast episode. If you have any questions, if there is something that's holding you back from realizing your true potential, please send us an email. The email is in the episode description. Otherwise, have a relentless week, and bye.